Welcome to Building Your Best Brain podcast. My name's Sylvie, and I'm excited to dive in with you on some scientific evidence regarding meditation. So, I did my yoga teacher training back in 2020, where I was introduced to meditation practice. And since then, there's almost been a day where I haven't gone without a meditation practice, and the changes I've experienced have been truly radical. And so it doesn't surprise me that there's quite a bit of a growing body of scientific literature that shows that there are fundamental cellular changes that occur with a consistent meditation practice. I want to share with you some of the favorite studies regarding my favorite studies, I should say, regarding meditation and changes to your DNA. Now, before I get into some of the research, I want to share a bit about the fundamentals when it comes to DNA. We inherit DNA from both our mom and our dad. So when the sperm meets the egg, there is an equal share of DNA. So we all contain in every single cell 23 chromosomes, and chromosomes are a way to kind of compact a bunch of DNA together. So they're in this like interesting X shape, and you get one half from your mom and one half from your dad. And the way that DNA is organized in chromosomes are really interesting. DNA is in this helix form, right? Which most of us are probably aware of. And the little nucleotides are known as adenosine, thymine, cytosine, guanine. And these are basically the building blocks of your DNA. And these helixes are organized in a way that's really compact. So it wraps around these ball-like proteins called histones, and then the histones themselves will wrap in on each other. And they continue to do so in a condensed way to get a chromosome. So your chromosome contains so many nucleotides, lots of genetic material, all wrapped into a really condensed package. Now, what's interesting about when it comes to DNA in our cells is that almost virtually all of our cells have the exact same DNA. And this is a bit, for me anyway, when I learned this, it's a bit much to think about, right? Because all of our cells are super unique, right? Like the neurons don't look like our skin cells. Our skin cells don't have the same proteins as our muscle cells, and our muscle cells behave in a very different way than the cells in our kidneys. So how, if we have the same DNA, we all have the same blueprint in every single cell, how do these cells differ from each other? Well, they differ at the level of what we call transcription. When we think of our DNA is basically a sentence. And in order to read that sentence, we need something called transcription factors. So these are proteins that are designated to bind to only specific parts of our DNA. And in those specific parts, it'll then read it, create a transcript, which is known as mRNA, which then, through many processes like translation, will turn into a specific protein. And so every cell will only have certain portions of the DNA book read. Now, for a transcription factor to be able to bind to the DNA, it needs to be available. So as I mentioned, right, in the chromosomes and the histones and the wrapping, only certain portions of the DNA will be accessible, open, and it needs to be open. There needs to be space for the transcription factor to bind and do what it does best, create a transcript, create a protein. One way in which your DNA will become more open or less open is through epigenetic factors. So this is something, this term has taken on many forms throughout scientific history, but it was really in kind of the early 2000s that this definition came about, which is changes in your genes through environmental factors. So your genes, not in the sense that your nucleides change, right? So the ATCG, none of that changes, but the ability for your DNA to be more open or closed can be altered through epigenetic tags. And these are known as methyl tags and acetyl tags. They're these chemical compounds, and the acetyl tags will cause the DNA to have a more open conformation, and the methyl tags will do the opposite. They'll have a more closed conformation. And what this impacts is the likelihood of this DNA to express a protein. And what's interesting is that this is hereditary, right? So many groups have shown this. Dr. Michael Meany from McGill University showed this, that a mother can pass on the epigenetic landscape to her pups in mice. And it's consistent throughout the cell cycle. So our cells continually divide, different rates. Some cells are better at it than others. And the epigenetic landscape, we like to call it, is persistent throughout each cell division. And these tags can be altered based off of environmental factors. So things like your diet, life experience, different chemical exposures. And what's interesting is meditation has been shown to influence the epigenetic landscape. And before I dive into the evidence, I want to give a brief definition of what meditation is. From the yogic perspective, because meditation has been taken on in various religions or denominations, right? So there's Zen, Buddhist. But when we look at the yogic perspective from the Panchali Yoga Sutras, the way that it's devised is in 8 limbs or 8 steps, however you like to look at it. And if we look at it in the stepwise function, the yoga physical practice being around the 3rd limb, the breathing practice being around the 4th, meditation practice, also referred to as dhyana, is the 7th limb. So it's kind of all the way towards the end. And its meaning is meditative absorption. So kind of absorbing everything that you've done leading up to that point. Well known as a tool or a technique to help settle, focus, and concentrate. But the actual practice itself is pretty hard to define. It is something that we do, but it's more a description of a state, right? So I'm sure you've heard this before, being in a meditative state. I'm not going to pronounce this author's name because I don't think I'm going to get it right, but the first author is Chaix, and they published a study in 2017 looking at genome-wide methylation in both. This is basically looking at your epigenomic age. So it's been well established now that over your lifespan, you'll have an increase in methylation that is genome-wide, not gene-specific. It's an interesting biological measure to see kind of your internal age, right? So your body's age versus your physical age, how long you've been on this earth for. And what they found was that the epigenetic aging rate in experienced meditators are significantly decreased by their age-matched controls. Something else that they noted that's really interesting is that the epigenetic profile of meditators over the age of 50 was similar to their control participants, so non-meditators, that were under the age of 30. So the rate, your epigenetic rate, significantly decreases when you meditate, and you could have an epigenetic age of 30 when you're over the age of 50, which is quite profound. And the same group in 2020 did a follow-up study in which they looked more specifically at the experienced meditators. And they looked at what a short meditation intervention could do. And what they found was after a short meditation intervention, so I think it was around 10-15 minutes, they saw a rapid influence in their methylome after the fact, so their entire methylation. And they looked at specific genes, and they found that this was linked with genes that were related to aging as well as related to immune response. So this study really illustrates quite nicely this beautiful blend of our environments. So tools that we're able to implement, relating it to the aging process, but relating it directly to our genes, right? So this is like one of the smallest components of our body and is essentially the blueprint on how we express ourselves at the cellular level. And again, right, cells kind of come together, they create organs. Those organs operate and they show up in our physical world in the way that we digest things, the way we breathe, the way we think. Found this study, I was quite convinced that I will continue with my meditation practice, and that the actions that I can implement on a daily basis do have a profound impact all the way down to my genetic material. Mind-blowing. If you're interested about these specific studies, these are also not the only researchers that have shown this. I've included the papers in the show notes. If you can't find them for any reason, please feel free to DM me at Synaptic Sylvie and I'll point you in the right direction. And thank you for your time, and stay tuned for the next episode on building your best brain. Bye.